Alright, hello once again. This is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College. I've been going through a series of video presentations for two Muroc books that are used for the Rankin Technical College AWD, that's Application and Web Development 1000 Web Technologies class. The books that are used for the class are Muroc's HTML5 and CSS3 4th edition. I've gone through and made presentations based on the PowerPoints of all 20 chapters, and now I'm hopefully finishing up on the other book, which is Muroc's JavaScript and Jquery 3rd edition. So far I've gone through all of section 1, all of section 3, and chapters 8 and 9 on section 2. So I'm going to come in right now and go through the rest of section 2, chapters 10, 11, and 12. And that should be it then. And hopefully next week I'm going to start building this long-awaited website. Alright, so chapter 10, which is entitled How to Work with Forms and Form Validation. Now, I have talked about this before in regards to other parts of web development, but I do want you to realize that there are basically several different ways that you can perform validation. I guess the first way it's not even performing validation is just to not do any validation and just hope that the end user knows what the heck they're doing. As you can probably imagine, that's about the worst way of doing things. All right. Secondly, you can go in and do a lot of form validation now. If you're working with HTML5, you can do a lot of this validation with with HTML5 itself. All right, with things that are built into HTML5, required setting a field type to email, etc. Okay, you can come in with regular generic JavaScript and do form validation. You can come in and use many of the things that are in this chapter and use jQuery for form validation, including some jQuery form validation plugins. Now, I'm going to break script here for a minute, and I'm going to come in here and I'm going to type in jQuery form validation plugin. And there is a site out here that is, show it to you really quickly, and again, I'm not going to get off on too big of a tangent here. Sorry if it seems like I am. There it is. Let me blow this way up. All right, so it's jqueryvalidation.org. If you go out to that site, you're going to find what you see right here. All right, and they talk about the jQuery Validation plugin. I would suggest if you're ever going to use this, that you start by looking at this video that's, I don't know, it's about 17 minutes long on how to use it. All right. There's a download for the plugin here, and as you'll notice, other than that, not a whole lot, because virtually all of it is listed inside here. So if I bring that up, oh, it's about 13 minutes. All right, but I thought it was very well done. You may or may not agree. All right, so jumping back. Use any of the jQuery selectors methods and event methods for working with forms and controls. Describe how you use HTML5 controls and attributes for forms. Describe how you use HTML5 attributes and CSS3 pseudo classes for data validation. Talk about some of the jQuery selectors. You can see them right there. Talk about the jQuery trim method. The jQuery trim method, to my knowledge, is a lot like the JavaScript trim method. It is designed to remove beginning spaces and ending spaces from an entry. Describe the use of several of the jQuery event methods for working with forms and controls, and describe the use of several jQuery event methods for triggering events. All right, so here's a simple form, and that's actually a person. All right, I've dealt with Ms. Judy Taylor, excuse me, Judy, who's a salesperson at Muroc and a very nice person. All right, so we come in there, and we can set up a form like this. that appears to be a valid email address, and there's something in there for the first name, valid as well. So if we click the button, we would go out to join.php. We would pass in the email address, which would be judy@muroc.com. We would pass in a first name of Judy. All right, you can see the email address. That's the ID. That would again be this. The first name, the ID, would again be this. All right. So when you are working on client side, you're working with IDs. Once you get over to the server side and work with a file like PHP, then you're working with names. You'll notice that virtually, and this is how about 99% of the time, the ID and the name are the same. Now there's going to be things like when you talk about radio button groups, checkbox groups, etc., where that is not going to be the case. But by and large, when you're programming, most web developers that I know make the ID and the name the same name. So the ID attribute and the name attribute are the same. So the name is referred to typically in server-side code. The action is the name of the file. So there's the action right there. Somewhere in here where they have it. There we go. Action equals join.php. The method here is get. And you've got to look for the method. Get is the default. Get is basically when you're, okay, if you walk into a room and I don't know you, I stick out my hand and I say, hi, my name's Jeff. What's your name? And you say, hello, my name is Barbara. All right? That would be a get. I am getting your name. If I'm a teacher in a classroom, and if the same Barbara comes into the classroom and I say, you know what, Barbara, I've already got 3 other people in this room that are named Barbara. What's your middle name? And she says, Mary. And I say, would it be all right if I called you Mary? She said, yeah, that would be fine. That's like a post because I'm resetting, for lack of better words, her first name. All right. By now in this class, you should know what a form is, what a control is, field, submit button, reset button, and you should have an idea of what data validation is. Now, these are some of the types that you can set rather than text. Email will check, for example, that it is a well-formed email. If I put that in, and then I put my email as jpscott@rankin.edu, that will be valid. It doesn't say that something exists, so if I put jscott@rankin.edu, which I don't think exists, it wouldn't fail that because that's still a validly formed email. All right, same thing with the URL. Telephone numbers, that one is probably the worst. In fact, what I'm going to do very quickly, you've seen me do this before, is I'm going to go out here to Can I Use? And I'm going to put in tel, T-E-L. And the support is much better than it used to be. Notice that Opera doesn't support it at all. Earlier versions of Safari, Chrome and Firefox, and IE, of course. But it's pretty much getting support. Especially today, if you've ever gone out to a website and you've clicked the button that says tel or phone, or you clicked on the phone number and it brings it up. That's great for a mobile device. Number, we've talked about this before, that you can set up number, you can set up a minimum and a maximum, but the user can still go in and put in a number that's out of range. Dates and times can typically bring up a date or a time, a time picker type of thing. Autofocus, where you make sure that the field, that the cursor is in a certain field, and placeholder text, which is that grayed text that as soon as you click in the field and start typing, it goes away. All right. So they have here, this is a form that that uses some of these controls, and you end up with this. So again, this is the built-in stuff by saying type equal email, type equal tel, etc., that you get automatically from HTML. All right. So I've talked about some of these. We've talked about required. I believe title is used mainly, I could be wrong here, I think it'll give you a tooltip. And I believe it's also used for browsers for people, like say for the blind. All right. Patterns that you can use with regular expression patterns. So if I wanted to set up a pattern for a phone number or a zip code. The no validate, I think you can tell it to skip validation, and the autocomplete to do just that. There are CSS3 pseudo classes that can be used. Notice there's required, required. All right. There's valid and invalid. All right. Here's an example of required fields. Autocomplete is off, another required field, and a pattern. And there's the title. I guess that's the text that comes back, and you put something. All right. See, that must be. You still get a generic message, and then you can add your own to it. All right. 2 of the reasons why you need JavaScript for data validation. First, HTML5 features aren't implemented by all current browsers. Again, that's getting to be more and more not the case. But the second one is true. HTML5 is limited in the types of validation it can do. You have to remember that HTML5 is not a programming language. All right? It's not even really a scripting language. It's a markup language. It was not designed for you to be able to do programmatic types of things. That's just not, that's not its forte, so to speak. Here are some of the jQuery selectors that you can use. Now, I'm not going to go through any of these. Some of them should make sense. Some of them I believe we'll see in the examples that are coming up. We've talked about val before. All right. And when you use val with something in the parentheses, you're setting the value. And when you use the val with nothing in the parentheses, you're getting the value. Trim we've already talked about. Here is an example on how to get a value out of a text box, or some, I should say not a text box, probably, but something with an ID of age. You want the value, and you're attempting to parse it into an integer and put it into age. Here we're trimming the value. If you've never heard the story, this is what I've been told at least. With trim, in days gone by, when people would create an HTML form and they would say all fields are required. What some people would do, for example, they didn't want to give their middle name or even a middle initial. So they'd just come in there and they'd hit the space bar. And before the trim function really became in vogue, you could do that and get away with putting that into a field. All right. How to get the value of a checkbox or a checked radio button in a group. Again, notice it's .val, nothing in the parens. Putting it in there. How to get the an array of selected elements from a list. Okay. Here are some event methods for forms. We've talked about that if you've got a form, let's keep it real simple with 3 fields on it. First name, last name, email address. If I'm in the first name, that means that the focus is now on the first name field. If I go and tab to the last name field or just click on it with my mouse or whatever, 2 things happen. A blur event that when I go from the first field to the second field, and a focus event when I go to the second field. All right. I can check when something is changed. That might be, for example, in a text box where I ask you to type in a number. And if you type anything non-numeric in, I just refuse to accept it. Select and submit. Okay. A handler that disables or enables radio buttons when a checkbox is checked. All right. Again, we've talked about many of these. A handler that triggers the submit event after. So we're only going to submit this if the data validation code that we put in here has passed. All right. Great example right here. You'll notice, well, what do we have? Invalid email address, password not big enough, required field, Okay, that looks good, that looks good, no phone number. So they show you the associated code for this. All right, and then they'll show you the JavaScript validation that's done. Notice it's jQuery. We got the document.ready, radio button change, etc. We're going through all the stuff that's in here. And only if that succeeds will we submit it. All right. This can be as elaborate or as ornate as it needs to be. So in other words, you can have very little validation. Really, you can have no validation, and you can validate the heck out of something. All right. Look at what's here. This isn't valid because there's no dot there. Now we've got the dot, but the two aren't equal. Here we've left a field off. There, that's valid. Here we want a 2-character code, CA, instead of the word California. Here, kind of interesting because they only want the 5-numbered zip code. They don't want the 5 numbers hyphen the 4 numbers. And here you have to select at least one entry. So there's a lot of ways that you can set this up. There are several examples that are in here. Oh, I thought this chapter was longer. Evidently, we have come to the end of it. All right. So this will finish up Chapter 10 for us. When I come back in just a couple minutes, it'll be Chapter 11. How to use jQuery plugins and jQuery UI widgets. So I'll be back with that presentation shortly.